Right, welcome everyone to our latest FREDTalk. Jim Reagan is here to talk about his books that he's written about prohibition in Ogdensburg specifically and the surrounding area. If you haven't read them, I highly recommend them. Jim was raised in Ogdensburg himself, went on to the University of Virginia where he studied writing and help me. Government, and proceeded to work in the field of newspaper and publication, and went on in Washington, D.C. and in Virginia to do those things. Was retired to his hometown of Ogdensburg, New York, where he continues to write about the history of the area. So, welcome, Jim.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for coming out on such a gloomy spring day. It's always a pleasure to be talking to people about Ogdensburg's somewhat shady history. A lot of times we think, we all know Prohibition happened, but we really don't associate Ogdensburg with high-speed chases, gangsters, shootings, murder attempts, robberies. We think those are things that happen somewhere else, but actually they happened right here. And if you will, I'd like you to step back in time to 1920 with me. The states had ratified the Prohibition Amendment prohibiting people from making, owning, transporting, selling alcoholic beverages. It's gone to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld it and said if this is what the people want, then this will be the law of the land. And here in Ogdensburg, a month or two later, there's a couple of sailors who are in town on a dredge that's deepening the harbor, and they go out for a night on the town, have quite a good night, and end up staggering down to the shore where their tugboat is, and promptly pass out on the dock next to the tug. And at some point over the course of the night, they roll off the dock into the river, and neither of them can swim. And they're yelling for help and raising a ruckus. And this is back when, if you've ever seen any pictures of Ogdensburg before urban renewal, the shoreline was covered with all sorts of little boathouses, shanties, small warehouses, and other kinds of places. So people heard their shouts for help and came down, and they were able to find one of them. He was hanging on a pier, but the other one was nowhere to be found. And the police launched an investigation and later told the reporters from the Ogdensburg Journal that the sailor and his friend had been out the night before drinking alcohol at 3 different speakeasies. And a few days later in the Advance, which in those days was a weekly newspaper, the Sunday Advance, and the editor of the Sunday Advance was a noted advocate for prohibition. He raised a question. He said, what is it that if we have this prohibition law of the land and selling alcohol's illegal, and the police are quoted in the newspaper saying that these gentlemen were at 3 different speakeasies that evening, why haven't there been any arrests? Why are these speakeasies still open? How many other speakeasies are there in Ogdensburg? And why isn't this law being enforced? Well, a few days later, the Ogdensburg Journal reporters go to the district, the city police chief, and they go, Chief, the Ogdensburg Advance is raising the question, if you know about these illegal speakeasies, why are they still open? Why haven't you made any arrests? Why aren't you shutting these places down? We've got this national prohibition law. And the chief goes, that's a federal law, and we're awful busy. We have a lot of laws we have to enforce. We just don't have time or resources or men, to deal with these federal things. That's something that the feds are going to have to work at. They pass these laws in Washington. They really need to take a look at how that's going to work. We're kind of busy with all the stuff that we're doing. And so they went to the district attorney and they said, well, you're the district attorney. What are your plans? We're awful busy. Awful busy. We got a lot going on. This is one of those new federal laws that passed. The feds really need to take a look at this. And, So, anyways, at that time, over in the post office here in Ogdensburg, upstairs was the U.S. courthouse, and had the offices for the U.S. attorney, who was the chief federal law enforcement officer from Binghamton up to the North Country and all the way over to Lake Champlain. And his name is Dennis Lucy, and he was actually a former mayor of Ogdensburg, and was a noted attorney, and he read these articles because it was in his hometown newspapers. And he was very unimpressed with the answers that were being given. He saw these remarks being made as a direct attack on him. And so he called in some of the area newspaper people and said, I'd like to talk about, what they're saying in Ogdensburg. you know, if you check, you'll find that the police and district attorneys throughout upstate New York are enforcing the new prohibition laws. I personally brought into federal court over 100 violators and have gotten them convicted. And there's absolutely no reason why they can't do it in Ogdensburg when they're already doing it in every other town state. And he said, the police, as far as I can determine, the only thing that they're doing is jumping out of the way when a bootlegger comes zooming down Fort Street. They're not doing their jobs, and it reflects on them. And if they need help understanding the law and how it works, I'll be more than happy to instruct them and provide them with the information they need so they can understand their responsibilities. But if really what they're trying to say is they don't want to do this, well, then we'll be able to tell if they just let these places continue operating, because it's not a matter of that they don't have the law enforcement power. It's that they really don't seem to have any interest in enforcing this new law. Well, a couple months later, the Dennis had written a letter to the U.S. Attorney General and had asked for some federal help trying to bring this problem in upstate New York, under control. And he asked for some federal assistance. And one day, 4 gentlemen got off the train at New York Central Railroad Depot and stopped in at the Oswegatchie Hotel. Some of you may remember the Oswegatchie Hotel. Later on, it was known as Chapel's Hotel. But they stopped in there. They stopped in a little lunch counter place right next to City Hall. Stopped in a few other places. Then we went to the U.S. courthouse and provided depositions to the U.S. magistrate and obtained search warrants. They were G-men. We today know about the G-men who brought down Al Capone. Well, the G-men were in Ogdensburg as well. And they went over and at the Oswegatchie Hotel, they had fully stocked bar. It was as if prohibition had never occurred. They had every kind of wine and liquor available. You could buy it at their bar. And they came in, busted the place, moved on to LaSalle's lunch counter, and Joe LaSalle, for some reason, had word had spread through town about these strangers who had come to town. And Joe had hurriedly locked the doors of his lunch place and had gone to his home on Tate Street. And what's interesting is this LaSalle's lunch counter was also operating as a very popular speakeasy in Ogdensburg. And it was only a couple hundred feet from the police station. But obviously no one had quite noticed it or something. I'm sure. But the point is, they eventually went to Tate Street, found Joe, and arrested him. Meanwhile, down on the shore, 2 gunboats and a small naval vessel had pulled up to shore. Each of the gunboats had a crew of 10 and were armed with 1-pound cannons. And the naval vessel had a crew of 80 and 6-pound cannons. And Dennis Lucy called all the area reporters in and said, everybody was asking where the federal government is. Well, it's here. We've arrested several local bootleggers and speakeasy operators, and we have brought in these vessels that are going to patrol the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes, and we are going to put a stop to all this rum-running and all of this smuggling that's going on. And people have been asking, where's the federal government? Well, we've arrived. Well, next day, a couple of ministers from Potsdam showed up to see the G-men. And they said, we've got a problem over at Potsdam. Even though the prohibition laws have been in effect, there are people who are still drinking in Potsdam. And we've done sermons. We've done sermons at our churches. And we've warned them, that nothing good is going to come. And we've told them that you can't be a good Christian if just you go to church on Sunday, but you're in these evil speakeasies the other 6 nights a week. And we need you to shut them down, and we'll show you where they are on one condition. I said, what's that? So we want to go in with you when you arrest them, because we want to see the look on their face when they see us with you and you arrest them for ignoring what we've been preaching. The G-men were like, cool, come on, that'd be great. We'll teach them. So they did. And it was just the beginning of an effort to crack down on some of the bootlegging that was occurring, but at the same time, there was still a great deal of liquor coming across either on land over near Malone into the U.S. or by water. And the one fall night in October 1921, the U.S. Customs Director, and the Customs Director in those days in Ogdensburg oversaw all the customs ports from Lake Champlain to Oswego. And he had heard that there was a load of liquor coming through, and he got together some of his customs officers, and he asked state police for some help, and they gave him some officers. And they went out, and they set up a roadblock out in DeKalb. Many of you know over in Old DeKalb, there's a very sharp turn. And so they had set up their roadblock there, and they're waiting for this load of liquor coming through. But another vehicle came first, and after they cleared them through, as they were repositioning their vehicles, this other vehicle came slamming through full tilt, and they had to pull aside in order to keep from being hit by the truck because the bootleggers were going full speed, heading on toward Governor. So the officers all jumped out of their vehicles. The two troopers jumped on the sideboards of the vehicles. And, in those days you had these big roadsters, and they had sideboards that were big enough to stand on. And they commenced a high-speed chase through Old DeKalb. And sorry. Sure, my wife is calling me. She knows I'm here. Anyways, so they're barreling down the road toward Ridgeville and Governor when they began to pull up alongside, and the bootleggers fired some shots at them. And they returned fire. And as they pull up closer to them, one of the troopers sees the individual starting to aim his pistol at him, and he pulls the trigger and fires at him, and just that moment they do that sharp turn over as you're going toward Ridgeville. And one of the vehicles with the trooper who fired the shots spins out of control and hits a telephone. And the bootleggers continue and escape. Unfortunately, one of the bootleggers has been shot, and his driver looks at him and sees that he may be dead, and decides, well, maybe he needs medical treatment. So he goes to a farm outside of Governor, where he hides all the liquor, and then takes his friend in to find the doctor. And the doctor says, well, sorry, he's dead. Maybe if we'd gotten here sooner, might not be. Well, they call the police to come in and investigate, and they explain, the bootleggers explain that, they had been driving along, and these individuals tried to wave them over, and they were concerned that these individuals were hijackers who were trying to hijack their vehicle, and so they had him pulled over, and they got into a high-speed chase. Shots were fired, and one of the bootleggers. So the very next day in all the newspapers is a story about this high-speed chase, individual being killed in a shootout during it, and how these individuals were avoiding these hijackers. And well, that next day, the customs director and the people, troopers and customs officers, were like, well, that's strange. That's where we were. And we got into a high-speed chase and shots were fired. I think they're talking about us. So they went to the press and said, "This is really how it happened. We were the people who, were conducting a lawful stop. They knew we were law enforcement officers, and they intentionally took off and put us at risk and fired at us, and we fired at them in self-defense. And, this notion that they didn't know it was us is just nonsense. They're obviously people who have no respect for law. And, well, the district attorney announced that he would have to present this to the grand jury. And he asked the police chief to arrest the U.S. Customs Director on a charge of technical manslaughter, and also to arrest the state trooper on a charge of technical manslaughter. And said that, there were a lot of people who didn't feel that they should be firing guns on the public highway, and that innocent people could be injured or killed with this kind of shootouts on the public roads. Well, he took it to the grand jury. The grand jury was presented with evidence from federal officials that said that because these were federal officers and officers acting under federal authority, that they were perfectly justified in their actions and could not be prosecuted for doing their jobs. But the grand jury and the district attorney issued a report that said the trooper ought to be fired for showing poor decision-making by firing shots on a public highway under these circumstances. And the state police commander, when he received that report, said, "This is nonsense. We are going to continue doing our jobs. We are not going to be intimidated or told what we can and can't do by these local officials. We've been giving this job to end the sale, manufacture, and transportation of illegal alcohol, and we intend to do it." Now, take a little detour over to downtown Madrid. Some of you have been to Madrid before. The gentleman by the name of Sam Adamson had arrived in Madrid from Brooklyn. He had a couple friends of his from Brooklyn. And they had decided to lease a local cheese plant. And they explained to the local people that they would be operating only at night because they had a secret recipe for making cottage cheese. And they had to keep it secret. Yeah. And so, most evenings they would see these vehicles come in to the cheese plant, and these gentlemen from Brooklyn loading what they assumed were secret ingredients into the cheese plant. And well, the sheriff's office was a little suspicious. So one night, when Sam's crew arrived and were unloading their secret ingredients, suddenly they found these sheriff's deputies, and the sheriff's deputies noticed that the secret ingredients were bottles of liquor that they had apparently brought in by boat to Waddington and then brought up to Madrid to the cheese plant. And what they were doing was they would take those big metal milk containers and they fill them with bottles of liquor and then put a false bottom on top with some cottage cheese. And then they would close them up and ship them to Brooklyn. And the, this rage sort of put an end to their whole cottage cheese conspiracy. So Sam and some of his friends needed to find a new business, and they ended up moving to Detroit, where they joined what was known then as the Purple Gang. And the Purple Gang was one of the most violent organized crime groups in the country at the time. They supplied the liquor to Al Capone's mob in Chicago. And they also were known for their violence and their assassinations. And they had gone into contract assassinations. So if you lived in some other big city and needed someone killed, you could call the Purple Gang in Detroit, and they would send someone to your city who would go to find the person that you wanted to kill them, and then go back to Detroit. There'd be no way to trace their connection to you. And in Detroit, many people believe that it was the Purple Gang that was responsible for the St. Valentine's Day massacre. It's one of the theories. The Sam Adamson later was assassinated himself. He died in a hail of bullets in a downtown Detroit restaurant. Several days later, the person who was suspected of killing Sam was found dead. He'd been murdered somewhere else, but his body had been dumped in front of Sam's apartment building in what the Detroit newspapers described as a message that had been sent that the Purple Gang was unhappy that Sam, a long time and very loyal member of the Purple Gang, had been murdered. The interesting, right around that time, the New York State Police was just getting its footing, and they had announced that they were going to bring a state police troop to northern New York, and they chose to locate them in Malone. And everybody in Malone was all excited. They were going to 50 state troopers stationed in Malone. And the governor had assured everyone that once he had these, troopers up here, he was going to put an end to all this smuggling along the northern border. And he explained to people that, the state police would have, each trooper would have a horse, a Colt pistol, a Winchester rifle, and he didn't talk about the high-speed, souped-up vehicles that the smugglers had, or how somebody on a horse is going to be effective against them. But he assured everyone this was a great plan and quickly solve all the bootlegging problems along the board. Well, once they did get up and running, and the troopers, went to work with a will, and would team up with customs and other agencies to enforce the law. A group of defense attorneys showed up at the Franklin County Board of Supervisors here and asked them to pass a resolution asking New York State to remove the troopers and send them somewhere else. And the state police response was that it must be because the smugglers were unhappy and the troopers were doing their job, and they decided they weren't going to remove the Troop B from northern New York. Now, some of you may have heard of the Brno gang. Here in Ogdensburg, the Brnos were large family, had a lot of relatives and offshoots, and there was a small number over on this second ward up near Pine Street. We're not quite the same kind of church-going people that the rest of the Brno family were. And they used to hang out at what was known as the Red Devil Pool Hall, which was a speakeasy over on Pine Street. And right around that time, there had been a series of hijackings in town where other bootleggers would smuggle in loads of liquor, and then when this group would hear about it, they would go break into that person's house, steal all their liquor, and it worked out really well. Very successful business strategy. Well, one day, a lady called the Ogdensburg police station and said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but these guys are breaking into people's homes and I heard, it's my understanding that they're going to break into our house tonight. So the chief, got together some officers and a couple of sheriff's deputies and called a local cab because in those days the police didn't have cars of their own. And went over to the house and they had a couple of deputies stake it out. Then the chief decided that he and a couple of his officers would go over to that Red Devil pool hall and see if they can put an end to all this robberies and hijackings going on in town. Well, they showed up at the Red Devil pool and went inside, and there were a couple of the Brenos, some of the Amos, others in there. And one of the officers saw Jimmy Breno and said, we were warned for you. And he grabbed Jimmy, and Jimmy said, well, show me your warrant. He said, well, it's back at the station. Get your hands off. I'm not going anywhere with you if you don't have a warrant. And the officer pulled his nightstick and when he went to subdue Jimmy, found himself wrestling with, Jimmy was in his 20s, the officer was in his 60s, and Jimmy was in much better shape. Meanwhile, the rest of the guys in the pool hall, when they saw Jimmy being grabbed, and they all grabbed pool sticks. And the chief pulled his gun. And Jimmy had wrestled the billy club away from the officer. And the other officers had all been administered a kind of street justice by the various people who were part of that Breno gang. And meanwhile, a large audience had arrived from the Near Avenue neighborhood who were all rooting for the Breno gang over the police force. And Chief went to the doorway and yelled to the cab driver to come in and help him. And as the cab driver prepared to go, someone hit him in the back of the head with a iron pipe. And he, once he got back up on his feet, saw another cab driver drive by, and he told him to go get help. Said, we're being murdered here. And they went. Eventually, all the officers came out of the building, piled into the cab, and they were driving across the Lafayette Street Bridge when the other cab driver was coming back from City Hall, where he had found the district attorney. And the district attorney was not amused when he discovered that the police department had been beaten up by the Brown gang and chased out of the Red Devil pool hall. Well, every law enforcement group was looking for Jimmy Brown. And the upshot was they finally caught up with him, went to, he was facing charges, and a local attorney went in to see him, said, Jimmy, I'll take your case and I'll get you off. And Jimmy said, well, I don't have any money. How can I afford you? He said, well, we'll split a bottle of gin after this is all over. Jimmy said, well, I think I can swing that. And so they went to trial, and the attorney argued in court that since the police did not have a warrant for him and did not bring a warrant with them, that they had no business trying to take him into custody, and all the charges related to the incident had to be dropped. And the judge ruled that that was the proper way to handle it, and all the charges were dropped. And Jimmy Brunno was a man of his word, and he and the attorney split a bottle of gin, and he sent the billy club to the police station wrapped in a blue ribbon, because he didn't want to be accused of stealing the billy club. So those are just a few of the incidents that my books cover. This one, Who's Badboys and Bootleggers, has 32 different stories in it. The first, volume 1 has 20 or so stories in it, but it paints an interesting picture of northern New York and how Prohibition affected the lives of our ancestors. And, for many of us, we've always known Prohibition happened, but we always think that all the cool stuff happened somewhere else. But actually, history happened here. And it's up to us to preserve it, to make people aware of it, to appreciate it, and to make sure that our grandchildren grow up appreciating and knowing about their heritage. So thank you all for coming out. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take it.
Well, I'll kick us off. We did get a question here in the chat, and see. Ann Skelly says, congrats on your book. She appreciates you illuminating the area's rich history. It's fascinating to think that only a couple years before the Remington opened as a museum, a young cabbie staggered out of his taxi just blocks away at the Opera House. He'd been shot by an English smuggler. Would that area where the Oswegatchie meets the St. Lawrence have seen a lot of smuggling activity?
Yes, it did. that's one of the stories I didn't get to. Figured I talked quite a bit as it was. People were very patient. But a local cab driver was covered with blood when he got out of his cab over in front of what's now City Hall, and was able to get medical treatment after having been assaulted by a British smuggler. And there's many instances of smugglers bringing booze down to the White House Point area and other parts of the city, wherever they could think they could get away.
Hey, she did have a second question here. Was there anything from your years with the Ogdensburg Journal and Advance News that stands out as vividly as the events of Prohibition?
Yes, there have been murders here in Ogdensburg. There's been shootings. I was out at the St. Regis Mohawk Reservation when the FBI raided the illegal casinos that were operating out there for quite a while. So, we have things that are constantly happening. I mean, luckily, and this is something a lot of people who haven't lived elsewhere have trouble understanding. My first job, I worked for a newspaper down the south side of Virginia, at the Martinsville Bulletin. And I had to sit next to a police scanner and on Saturday night wait for someone to get shot. And most Saturday nights, I wasn't disappointed. And I would have to race to a shooting scene and sometimes, beat the police there. So it always amuses me when I talk to people who are like, "Oh my God, someone stole my son's bike off the porch. Ogdensburg is gone to hell." And it's like, there are places that are a lot worse than Ogdensburg. I have friends who had their cars jacked while they were stopped at an intersection in the Washington, D.C. area. The list goes on. And, luckily for us, we have something tragic happen, once every couple of years, or, and we tend to, because they're nearby, it tends to stick with us. But in other places, what passes for crime around here, other people are like, you people are very lucky to live where you do. And
it's child's play compared to bigger cities, right?
Well, yeah. But they're not necessarily bigger cities. I mean, when I lived in Martinsville, a little bit bigger than Ogdensburg, and it was not unusual for people to be shooting at each other. Just a whole different culture and a whole different way of life. And, I was like, this has been a lot of fun for a couple of years, but I think I'll go back to Ogdensburg.
Now, I have a question. I don't know if your book covers this at all, but how was there any involvement with Akwesasne when it comes to the bootlegging era?
Oh, my books had not covered Akwesasne because we had plenty of our own smugglers and criminals right here, homegrown. And probably in some of my future books, we will talk about some of the things that happened over there. But, you know, everyone tends to think that, you know, if you write about Akwesasne and smuggling during Prohibition, you're like, well, of course, you know, Akwesasne, smuggling, and, you know, the point I wanted to make in my books is we were all doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's plenty of, you know, very interesting stories right here amongst our own ancestors. And rather than just sort of playing into the, you know, normal narrative, well, it all happened over there, because it didn't.
So I'm not sure if I don't know how the rules work when it comes to Akwesasne. Did they have the same prohibition laws that the rest of the U.S. did, since they're going to have their own governing body?
The thing that most people don't understand about Akwesasne is that they actually have three different governing bodies. They have they're split. Part of it's in Canada, part of it's in the U.S. The part of it that's in the U.S. has a governing body that is recognized by the U.S. And the part that is in Canada has a governing body that's recognized by the Canadian government. And those are elected positions, and they get to elect the people who, you know, run the government. Then you've got the traditional clan chiefs who are descended from the traditional clan chiefs. So if you're a member of the Bear Clan, or you're a member of one of the other clans, you have clan chiefs, and they don't recognize either government, or the U.S. or Canadian government. And so sometimes the clan chiefs will, you know, you'll see, it was kind of interesting when before they had the current casino, which is recognized by the state and the U.S. government, the clan chiefs were issuing licenses to have casinos, and you pay the clan chiefs for your license. And, you know, in some cases, you had mafia outfits financing it because there were no background checks. You know, it was just a free for all. So, you know, it's but once you get off the reservation, and that's the thing, is it's not so much if they cross the border into the other part of the reservation. It's if they bring it outside the reservation, then they're in conflict with the federal.
Right. Okay.
So, and that's the case today But I found one interesting story where a state trooper from Utica was found up at St. Regis arresting smugglers and taking their loads of liquor. But he hadn't been given that duty by the New York State Police. But he was wearing his uniform, and nobody quite knew what he was doing with liquor after he seized it. He said that he was doing this in hopes of getting recognized and getting promoted quicker. Other people said, we kind of think you're a corrupt cop, so you're out of here.
Jim, would you recount the story that you tell in the preface of your first book about being in the library when you were in high school, I believe, and discovering the large volume and the history in Ogdensburg?
Yeah, when I was 15 years old, I was over at the Ogdensburg Public Library, and I saw this book. It was about this thing, and it said St. Lawrence County history. I remember looking at it and saying, what the hell is this? How can a book be this thick when it's about St. Lawrence County history? Because we all know, as most 16-year-olds are well aware, nothing ever happened. And so I opened the book, and I thought it was going to be like that chapter in the Bible where, Ephraim begets Orville, and Orville begets, it goes on for page after page. Well, instead, I found a 16-year-old youth from Canton had been bayoneted on 4th Street. I'm like, what? Because I used to live over on Elizabeth Street, just a couple blocks from here, and then later lived over on J Street High School, and on 4th Street all the time. What are they talking about? People being bayoneted on 4th Street. Well, so I read more, and it was during the War of 1812, February of 1813, when the Canadians and the British came across the frozen St. Lawrence and captured the village and killed a bunch of people and banned people. And I was like, oh my God, no one ever told me any of this. And and this was just, one little segment. And it was funny because when I moved back to Ogdensburg, became managing editor of the Ogdensburg Journal, Advanced News, I was very lucky to work under Chuck Kelly, and Chuck, encouraged my interest in local history, and I wrote a series of articles about the War of 1812 and about the lead up to the battle and the battle itself and all the rest of it. And this older gentleman came, this is in the 1980s. And this older gentleman came by, pulled his chair up next to my desk, looked at me in the eye, and was like, tell me the truth. That I grew up in Ogdensburg. I've lived here all my life. No one has ever told me about someone being bayoneted on 4th Street, or there was a battle in Ogdensburg during the War of 1812. Tell me the truth. you're making all this up, right? You're like, no, I'm not making this up. No, this really happened. This really happened. And what's interesting is that whether it's the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, the last battle of the French and Indian War was fought off our shore. 300 Frenchmen stood off 12,000 British for 12 days, fought them for 5 days and nights. History happened here. And our history is the history of North America. And we have to do a better job of educating our own families and future generations about the importance of our local history.
Thank you, Jim. That was a wonderful talk.
Now, Jim, one last question before we wrap this up. I think you actually spoke with Romy about this a little earlier, but I wanted to get it on camera. You said that you are currently working on some more books?
Yeah. Yes, I am. But I haven't, I've got the material, I'm trying to pull them together. And I'm not quite sure which one I'll come out. I've got one on pirates on the St. Lawrence, one on prostitution in Ogdensburg in the North Country, various North Country heroes, a lot of different things that I think people would find interesting and that that also would be interesting to them. Yeah. Because you're never going to write about pirates on St. Lawrence and the pirates who came to Ogdensburg. You got to win.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ken. Thank you all for being here.